Or if this, or if this is your first time here, welcome. Um, Today we are talking and exploring what functional behavior assessments are and how they can lead to student success. So I am Jessie Allery, and I am a board certified behavior analyst and a licensed board behavior analyst. I'm also an early interventionist here at the North Dakota Center for Persons with Disabilities. I work primarily with those kids that are birth to 3. I'm also a special education adjunct faculty member. And prior to this stage of my career, I was a special education teacher from 2011 to 2021. Many of you have seen me before. Whoa, go back a second, Krista. You're jumping the gun. Thanks. And I'm so thankful and grateful that you guys are all here to be a part of this, and I hope that you learn something. I just wanted to show that that is my cute corgi. I work very hard so she can have a very cushy life. That's all. People that are animal lovers will understand. Okay. Now, I am a major fan of Joanna Gaines and her cooking show, Magnolia Table. She makes preparing these elegant, really beautiful looking dishes super easy for amateur cooks like myself. I have been known to burn more than I've actually done well, but it's not her fault. um, but some of the profession of, sorry, words are struggling today. Some of what we do is trying to make sure that people who are not in our field can understand what a functional behavior assessment is, making sure that people have access to this information in a way that isn't overly technical, that it's not overly jargon. And so just as this is a way for you all who are not as familiar with this to learn about functional assessments and to understand what they are, how you can conduct them, or what happens when maybe others in your school districts are conducting them. If you have a very severe behavior or something that you are dealing with a specific kid or a group of kids, please contact your behavior specialist, a behavior analyst, or school psychologist, and do that extensive behavioral intervention rather than trying to do this all on your own. So kind of like another way to put this is just because I watch Magnolia Table, it does not mean that I'm qualified to open a restaurant or a bakery or all of the things that Joanna Gaines does. So just as this is kind of a basic understanding, and there will be some tools that you guys can utilize, if there is something that is more severe, more problem behavior, please reach out to your team and utilize those people. So the first part of being able to define what a behavior is, because we need to know what we're looking at, what's going on, what's the problem. And so defining behavior is anything that an organism does in response to a stimulus. That's the technical jargon. In easier terms, behaviors are observable and measurable. So talking is an example of a behavior because I can see it. I can't see talking. I can hear it. I can see your lips moving. But thinking would not be, because I can't see you thinking. I can assume that you are thinking, but it's not something that's measurable. We were also taught by someone years ago in my undergrad, and then again in graduate school, that behavior is anything that a dead man can't do. And so I really like that example, especially when looking at plans where I've been told, well, this kid, he's just not doing anything. Well, not doing anything isn't a behavior, right? A dead man can just sit and not do anything. Is the student screaming? Are they hitting? Are they ripping up their papers? What exactly is that student doing? So we're really looking at what are those observable and measurable ways of describing that behavior. Okay, so next we talk about the topography or the form of the behavior. This refers to the way a behavior looks. It's the physical form or shape of behaviors exhibited by an individual. It focuses on those specific actions or movements. Are they doing a closed fist hitting? Or are they pinching? Are they yelling for 5 or more seconds? What exactly is happening? And so one of the reasons that, or a few of the reasons that topography works and why this is very specific is if you can identify that there are certain hand movements that somebody is using, like, oh, every time they make this facial expression, it might cue that, oh, something is going to happen. Noticing tone and volume of voices during communication, like I can see your face is getting red, I can hear that you're getting louder, they're getting agitated. Paying attention to some of those sequence of events, like, oh, every time a student is tying their shoes, once they get to putting that little bunny through the loop, that's where things fall apart. So just being able to kind of notice what are those specifics and those behaviors that are causing some issues. And this is a quote by Dr. Greg Hanley that just says, problem behavior is maintained by getting out of things they don't want to do the things they want to do with people they like to do things with. And they want that person to do a few other things for them. It's always escape. So if we think of that as in all behavior occurs for a reason, the goal of a functional behavior assessment is to discover that reason. Once the reason is discovered, then an intervention or a plan of action can be created. I don't like to do certain things and I avoid dishes by scrolling on Facebook, right? We all avoid certain things. And so just thinking of what is the problem, what are they doing to avoid it, or what are they trying to get out of that function of what, like, scrolling for me is an avoided behavior. So what are they doing it for and how can we address those issues? All behavior serves a purpose. Behavior continues because it's reinforced. The outcome may appear to be undesirable to an observer, such as if you're being removed from class for interrupting. Someone might look at that and, why are you disrupting all the time? I would hate to be removed from class. But to that student, they find that reinforcing, like, oh, I like being out of class. It serves some particular function. Before we're able to develop positive behavioral interventions that are likely to be successful with students, we first need to understand that function. Why are they trying to get out of class? Why are they being disruptive? What is occurring? What's that purpose? Because once we have the purpose, we can know what the next steps are. Okay, so a common question that I've often been asked is, do I have to get an FBA done in order to intervene on the behavior? And the answer is no, you don't have to have an FBA completed. However, understanding that if there is not a functional behavior assessment done, whether it's through yourself or through your team members, what you're doing is really just guessing. You're guessing that this might work and you're creating an intervention based on a guess. I don't know about you all, but I would really not want to go to a doctor that was just going to guess and, like, here, take this med or do this activity. It might help. Good luck. Like, that would make me really nervous. And so we shouldn't be doing that to kids or to adults. We shouldn't make a guess of what's going to work. We should really be trying to make sure that what we're suggesting is what's best practice. So sorry, I don't know why words are difficult today. Research has shown that people, when they intervene without a behavior plan, it tends to focus on punishment. When you only focus on that punishment piece, then you're only looking at stopping those behaviors that you don't like. You're not actually teaching a new or a replacement behavior. So this was an example. A parent who dislikes their child's self-stimulating behavior, such as repetitively sticking their fingers into their mouth. Every time the parent sees this, they pull the child's fingers out of their mouth. Well, what's missing? They haven't taught their child what to do instead. So instead of just yanking their fingers out are they going to have a chew toy or a different chewy? Are they going to put a pacifier or something? What are those other alternatives? And so when we just go free willy-nilly, we're going to just guess that this is going to work. We're really missing that evidence of what we need to teach. And so that's why we complete an FBA. A functional behavior assessment is founded in behavioral science or applied behavior analysis. It's an evidence-based practice, and it's required by IDEA when current behavior programs are not effective, when the behavior impedes learning of self or others, if it's a violation of the code of conduct and behavior is the manifestation of a disability, meaning the student is doing these behaviors because they are lacking these specific skills as a result of their disability, or the disciplinary change of placement, meaning if they've been sent out of school or if they've had an in-school suspension, if any of those types of discipline happens and then it exceeds 10 days. So the goals of functional behavior assessment include to establish a baseline of that operationally defined target behavior. So what is that specific? Is the child hitting someone with an open fist, with a closed fist? How do we look at those observable, measurable terms? Then we look at those antecedent variables, what's happening before the behavior and what's happening before when the behavior doesn't happen. What's the difference? How come in this setting we don't see the behavior and how come in this setting we do see it? And then we look at those variables that maintain those consequences, right? So consequences is just anything that happens after. It can be positive or negative. It can be, I got out of math class, or consequence can be, I did my math homework and I got an A and I got a sticker for it, whatever it is, right? So consequences is just what happens after. You identify those potential functions of the behavior, which we will talk about in a bit. And then you develop that hypothesis statement, or this is why I think this is occurring. So there are some basic steps of a functional behavior assessment. The first is to gather that information. The second is that direct observation. And third is to create the plan of action. And so we're going to talk a little bit about each of those steps in today's session. Step one, is clearly define that target behavior in observable and measurable terms. And I used my coworker Kyle as an example with his permission. So for a verbal refusal to work means that in class, Kyle responds to the teacher's instruction with words that indicate his refusal to do the assignment. During math, Kyle's teacher tells Kyle to start his assignment, and Kyle says, "This is stupid. You didn't say we had to do that." Or during English, Kyle's teacher tells Kyle to return to his writing task, and he says, "You can't make me do it." Those are observable and measurable things. We can mark every time Kyle says, "I don't want to do this, you can't make me do this." We can make sure that we know exactly what we're looking for in those classes. So the next step is to gather data. So indirect data is just some of those team meetings. We know that there's an issue. Maybe you've sat down with an IEP team or a 504 team. Maybe it's your general education paras and teachers saying, "Hey, what's going on? What do we need to do?" You do a review of that existing data. And if they are already on an IEP, a 504, any attendance information, anything like that, teacher, paraprofessional interviews, parent interviews, and then there's some student interviews. The next part of gathering data is doing that observational or direct data. And so this is about a guesstimate, right? So if you do about 4 to 6 observations in about 10 to 20 minutes across various settings. So if you know that the student is only struggling in math class, you're like, why do I need to go to science if I know they're struggling only in math? It could be that science is more engaging for the student, so they don't need to have as much redirection or they don't have as many struggles in that class. maybe they're sitting next to somebody that they really like, maybe, who knows? There's lots of different variables. And so by going into the settings that they're successful in, as well as settings that they aren't successful in, it allows you to kind of get that holistic view of what's going on with the student and what are things that are working in certain classrooms that maybe are not being implemented in another setting. And then these are just a couple of different examples of types of sheets or different ways to gather that data. So you can use an ABC, an antecedent behavior consequence recording, a narrative recording, event recording, teacher interactions, or momentary time sampling. When I give you the reference list, there will be examples of all of these, but I don't go into each of them in today's session. The next part, and this is, I'm going to make an assumption that I did not know what everyone's levels were in understanding what ABC meant. So this slide we will go through very quickly because I think most of the people on this call are well aware of what this is. So antecedent is what happens before. So is it you got a math assignment? The behavior is what's happening during that situation. Child rips up the math assignment. Consequence, child does not have to do math homework because the assignment is ripped. Or maybe it's consequences, child has to tape together the math assignment. Whatever that might be, it's that ABC. So just understanding antecedent is what happens before the behavior and consequence is what happens after. And here are some other things to think about, some other variables that happen during antecedents. So it's thinking about where is the student located? Are they in math? Are they in science? Are they in, what area are they at? When does it happen? Are behaviors consistently in the morning? Is mornings particularly tough? Is it in the afternoons? Is it during a specific period? Is it lunch? Whatever. Who is around when those antecedents are happening, that those behaviors are occurring, the demands or expectations, those environmental arrangements, again, where they're sitting, are they next to a bookshelf or something else that might be distracting? What instruction or curriculum are they being asked to do? If they're doing a solo project or a solo activity, are things okay? But anytime they're asked to do group work with more than one other person, does it get more difficult? Is the activity structured or unstructured? What is the level of support? Just meaning, do they have a para? Is there lots of visuals? Is the student someone who maybe auditory listening skills are tough for them, so they need that, list of tasks? Are those provided for them? Just kind of what are those other things in place? And then sensory. So what's the noise level? What are the lights like? What's going on in that environment? And here are just some other things to think about as far as the consequences that happen after the behavior. What are those patterns of conditions that happen after? Do they consistently get out of a certain class? Are they consistently sent to the office? What's occurring? What's maintaining that? What are we doing that positively reinforces? Meaning, are they getting something out of it? Maybe they're getting attention from the principal, and so that's a positive thing for them. Is it a negative reinforcement? Are they getting to avoid something, and so that's going to keep them from doing that activity? Or what are those, and it kind of provides those cues like, oh, every time this behavior happens, if this is consistently what's going on, the function is in that consequence. And so that's really an important piece to know as we're looking at those ABCs of, oh, whatever that consequence is really going to help to give us that function. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to include this because I have been that person that made faulty assumptions about kids, whether that was my own issues or just a lack of knowledge. Could be for a lot of reasons, but knowing that we're going to go in and we're going to take data on a behavior, and data can be tricky. We're looking at it of, did this occur, did it not? But it's also, if we're looking for something to be there, we will find it, right? If I'm looking for reasons to be irritated by a friend, then I will find those reasons. So let's make sure that we're not looking at whatever this behavior is occurring, and that we're not having some of these ideas seeped into our head, that we're not assuming that they're manipulative, we're not assuming they're just argumentative, we're not assuming that they're just disrespectful, that they just don't want to do it. Like, when we're looking at this, we really want to be objective into what's occurring, so that we can make sure that when we are looking at what is the function, that it's a true picture of it, and that our own thoughts or feelings have not seeped into that. So these are just a couple of different examples of some forms that you can use. I'm not going to go into this by any means. You will get copies of all of this. But this is just looking at what's happening, what's going on. It kind of gives a nice setup of putting the time, the date, all of those things in there for the first ABC chapter. And the second one is just another way to look at that information. There are a variety of ways and a variety of recording forms that you can use. I will send out a link of some of them, but if you look at this and you're overwhelmed and you're like, I don't know, this isn't making sense to me, please reach out and I can help you find one that will fit your needs. All right, so there are always 4 main functions of behavior. And I love this little everyone eats as a way to remind yourself what those are. So they are escape, attention, tangible, or sensory. So sensory stimulation is when you do something that feels good and elicits a pleasure response in the body. Some examples might be standing up and walking around the classroom because your legs hurt or your back hurts. I do that. If I'm sitting in my desk all day and I've been working on something, I have to stand up and walk around just because that feels good. Sometimes that can be engaging in behaviors that get you sent to the office. Maybe a student is doing some hand clapping, and that is distracting to someone. And maybe they're doing some nail picking or some biting or some self-harming. And so it's always going to be something that feels good to them. We might not always understand it, but to that person, it's what feels good. The next one is escape. So this is getting out of doing something or avoiding doing something. An example, again, would be to stand up and walk around the classroom. I'm going to avoid doing my reading because if I'm walking around, I can't read and walk at the same time. I can get out of this. Maybe it is doing behaviors like yelling or throwing a chair to get out of having to do an assignment or to get out of having to do a group activity. So it's that whole removing themselves so they don't need to do something. Attention is getting social reinforcement or interactions from someone. This can be, again, like making silly noises or telling jokes when you're supposed to be listening to the teacher because your classmates are laughing. Maybe it's wanting to be the loudest person in the room or have the most input in a situation so that you get told, good job, you've got this. So it's that reinforcing of attention. And then tangibles, gaining access to something, someone, or some activity. And so this might be, oh, I'm going to get up and walk around because I need my pencil and I left that at a different station. This might be making sure that you are doing your work as fast as you can because you know that if I finish my work, I get to have iPad time. Well, if your work isn't quality, you still shouldn't get that iPad time, but the end result of that tangible is what matters.
Jesse, I just have a comment. Is that okay if I ask that now or do you want me to hold it?
Nope, go for it.
Okay, so my kiddo actually had a really interesting sensory stimulation behavior. he was taking an antidepressant and a mood stabilizer, and he developed this like these weird tics where he would like flap his arm and like crack his elbow. So when he was doing it in class, of course, it was very disruptive to all the people around him, and it was very impulsive. Like he didn't even realize that he was doing it half the time, and it got to the point where it was like every 30 seconds he was doing it. And it wasn't really serving a purpose. It was literally a side effect of the meds. And I wouldn't have found that out either if I hadn't Googled it. I've worked with enough people with or adults with disabilities that were on a lot of psychotropic meds, so I knew to look into the side effects of it. So that's one thing to maybe just keep in mind if you do have some students that may be on different types of meds. We found out finally through gene site testing cheap. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that. It's when they swab and they check to see like what meds you're or we found out that everything that he was on, he didn't absorb anything. So all he got was the side effects and none of the benefits. So just something to keep in mind.
Absolutely. We never know what medication students are on or what those interactions are or reactions, I guess. I definitely had family members that would not want to share that information about medication their students were on. And so even though it was definitely a part of the situation, unfortunately, we won't always know. Some families don't want to share that, but I'm glad that you are that person that was willing to share. So that's awesome. It explains a lot. So our third step of the FBA is to identify that function of behavior. And so this is just an example, kind of how we've looked at what that is. And so under these conditions, so when asked to work on an independent work or when given multiple worksheet, the student does nothing. The function is to avoid it, right? I don't want to have to do this. And then the other consequence is they want that adult support. They want someone to come and sit with them and really give them that attention to be able to work on it. Another example is an adult support is irregular or not provided. So the student begins to verbally say that it won't be right, that they can't do it. And so then when there is somebody there to provide that support, the anxiety is reduced. So this is just that example of what the hypothesis statement can look like. It can be written a lot of different ways, but I just wanted an example for you guys. So why do we need to know the function? Because it helps us to know what we're going to do next. So once we know what happens before, during, and after, we can figure out what is our plan. So this was for the positive behavior intervention support plan. It can be whatever those next steps are. So if we know that there is a challenging behavior that is occurring, our goal is to be able to teach new skills, teach replacement skills, so that the consequences, we are reinforcing what we want to see. We're not reinforcing the things that are frustrating us, but we are reinforcing all of those good behaviors and not those challenging behaviors. The next one. So the next part of this really focuses on what you can do. So if you have a student that you know attention seeking is their function of the behavior, we need to make sure that whatever the function is, that we are matching our teaching or our replacement behaviors with that function. And so the next, say, 4 slides are really focused on if it is this specific type of function, what are some activities? And this is still meant to be individual. Not everything works for everyone, but here are some definite ideas. So for attention seeking, if you know that you have a student that loves that attention, how can we be proactive? So providing them with that attention before the problem occurs, making sure that they know that, oh, hey, like Miss Jessie just gave me a whole bunch of attention and I was able to do checkers with her at recess or whatever that is. Making sure that you can kind of front load that attention before we get into the math class that maybe I know is tough. Being able to set those clear expectations of, oh, if you want Miss Jessie's attention, you need to raise your hand, wait till I'm done talking, whatever that might be, but just making sure that those expectations are very clear from the get-go and that it's consistent. Practice and reward. This is something that I think often gets forgotten is we work with kids, right? We need practice all the time, just like students do. And so if they've raised their hand, like, oh, thank you, Joey, for raising your hand. I appreciate that so much. And then, you're rewarding that with attention. Knowing that it's not going to be smooth, it's not going to be an easy, hey, I did this and it's done and now it's going to work forever. But knowing that making that you need to teach that skill, maybe raising their hand is not their preferred way to do it. And they want to be able to bring you a sticky note that says, I need help, or whatever that is, whatever the skill is, teach it and reward it. Making sure that you can use some behavioral contracts or those if-then statements. So again, this is, if we get I just sounded really North Dakotan when I said, sorry, I got myself distracted. If you set up those if-then, so if we do our math, then we get to play Kahoot, or if we pick up everything from the floor and make sure that there's no garbage on the desk, then we get to, have 5 more minutes outside at the end of the day or whatever that is. But making sure, again, that that's a very clear expectation and that it's set from the get-go. And then just using those visual clues. For myself, I have written notes everywhere because if I hear something, as much as I want to pay attention, sometimes it goes in one ear and out the other by the time that I've left that person's space or I've left that setting. And so making sure that we are using either written notes or a picture cue to help students know, like, I need to raise my hand, or, I need to do this. And then a reactive strategy. So those ignoring attention-seeking behaviors, and that can be so hard, right? You've got a kid that is talking, that is doing all of the things to get all of your attention, and you're just like, I can't ignore this. This is so much. And I get it. It's so hard. You're in a classroom with 20 other kids, but you really want to ignore those inappropriate attention-seeking behaviors and really reinforce, thank you, Susie, for doing whatever this is. So making sure that, again, you're being proactive and letting them know what you want to see while you're not feeding into some of those attention-seeking behaviors unnecessarily. And I know it's so hard. Have an alternative consequence. So if you know that there is a student that just every time that they scream or they are talking with their classmates and you've removed them from the class, that's not fixing it, that they're having to sit up at your desk and that isn't changing it. Try thinking of what's a different consequence. What is another option? Okay, every time the student is interacting with someone, these things are happening. Can I use that to my advantage? Can I pair them with somebody else? Can they do a group assignment? How can we change what's happening so they're not always getting out of it, but what's another way? And then just giving that positive attention to someone else, about Susie being able to raise her hand. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And that relying on those proactive. Everything is, how do I word this? Not everything is plannable, right? There are some things that are going to happen and you're like, well, now what do I do? And so we end up being reactive. I'm reactive often, even though this is my bread and butter and I know it and I still do it. And so just as much as we can set up students for success by being proactive instead of reactive, we will all get better results. And okay, go ahead. You can go to the next one. Take a drink real quick. Sorry. Decreasing tangible seeking behaviors. So if a student is doing something because they really want to get something out of it, these are just some ideas in what you can do, right? We all want activities and we all want it now. Like if I say yesterday, for example, in a staff session, and I looked at a coworker, I was like, I want lunch. I'm hungry. I need it now. I'm not going to make it. that wasn't true. I was being dramatic. Clearly, I was going to make it if I have to wait 20 minutes for lunch. But we want things as kids, as adults, we want it now. And so the difference, though, is that we're able to wait, and we've learned those skills and to wait and to be patient. And how do we regulate ourselves and pop some candy in and wait another 20 minutes for lunch? But students don't always have those skills. They need to be taught how to have those. And so just thinking of it in that way, of that we need to help them learn what it is that they need to do. So number one is making sure they know how to get what they want appropriately. So we know that they want to be seen, they want to be heard, they want access to the iPad, or they want access to recess or ball, whatever that is. What do they need to do to get that, right? Do they know that if they request this item after they've done their math, that they can have access to it? Do they know that, like, we'll be able to play with in recess in 10 minutes or whatever it is? Do they know what it is that they need to do in order to access the iPad? Maybe it's a matter of, when you get your reading activity done and you've cleaned up your station, then you can have access to the iPad. So whatever that is, make sure that they know how they can gain access to that appropriately. Setting up the environment. Now, this might seem something like, really, Jesse, you're going to talk about this? And this is probably for those younger kids a little more, but making sure that you're setting it up for success. If you know that a student is distracted by maybe the toys or books or things on the bookshelf, having them placed away from the bookshelf. If you know that a student is constantly wanting the iPad, you remove the iPad, and now that it's in a locked cabinet. So kind of that out of sight, out of mind situation. So just really thinking, what are the outside environmental things that are maybe distracting for this student, and how can I help set up their environment so that they can be successful? So they're not looking around at all of the things that are distracting, but that we can focus on what it is that we need to do. The next one is building in those opportunities to get that thing, right? So how do you access this? Is it a matter of, if you use your functional communication to tell me that I want apple, great, you've been able to request an apple appropriately the way that I want, have an apple. Maybe it is that this child particularly likes Legos. How do we use it? There's so many cool math or reading activities we can do to still use Legos, but they can also be incorporated in other ways. So, I'm sorry, something made a weird noise. So it's a matter of building those opportunities so they're still able to access that. The next is say what you mean and mean what you say. And this, again, might sound silly, but if you tell a student, no, we can't have that. You need to do 5 math problems and then you can have it. If you said that, you need to stick to it. Because if you change and one day you stick to it and the next day they're tantruming or they're doing whatever and you give in after 3 math problems, that student has learned, if I just got to wait it out, and they're going to give in. So make sure that what you say is what you mean and that you stick to that. Students, no matter how small, how large, adult students, they're smart. They're going to learn real quick that you're not consistent. And then examine what's really going on. Are the students seeking those different items, or maybe food items, activity items? Is it because they don't know what's going on? Is it because they really just want to get out of their assignment because they don't understand it? Is it because the student maybe didn't get breakfast at home or didn't have a decent meal because they came in after lunch from an appointment or whatever? And so now they're seeking something to make them feel better. So just, there's lots of other reasons if we think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So make sure that you're knowing that there could be other factors as opposed to just wanting that tangible. So go ahead, Christy, you can go to the next one. All right, so decreasing sensory seeking behaviors. So this is making sure, again, that students know when and where they can access these behaviors or access what's appropriate. So there are times where having a fidget, totally appropriate, right? You can have a fidget on the bus, you can have a fidget in a classroom situation. Heck, as adults, I've got a lot of fidgets around my office that I use. Making sure they know when those are appropriate, and that sometimes using those sensory alternatives are not always appropriate. And so when can they access that? Just because we would like to have access to the swing doesn't mean we can always have a swing. And so just kind of helping students understand what they need to do to be able to have those, that stimulation that they need. Number two is to give students a more appropriate way to get that sensory need met. So if you're thinking of a student that, I had a student that loved the texture of cornstarch and flour, anything that was kind of that powdery, gritty type of texture. And he would go into a closet. I had an art kind of closet that we had done a variety of different science experiments with, and he would sneakily try to eat the cornstarch. Like that was his thing. So it was like, okay, he needs access to this, but I cannot have you eating cornstarch all day. Like this is not an option. So finding what was another alternative that was more appropriate, that he could still be able to have that texture. Was it something that he needed orally? Does he need to have gum? Whatever it is, but let's give them more appropriate ways to have that need met that isn't the thing that is inappropriate. And then building in those sensory related activities. This might be an easier feat for elementary age students and middle school students. That might end up being something a little more difficult with high school students, but thinking of really how can you help just build in those, whether it's textured or it's hands-on activities. What are those things that you can just do more throughout your day? And then reinforcing on-task behaviors with sensory breaks. So a student is doing really well, or they've been able to sit and do the math assignment or whatever that might be. You did so great today. Do you want to be able to go and play with the sand for 5 minutes or whatever it is? So just being able to have those sensory options as a way for the student to take a break. And again, that examine what's going on. Maybe if the student is really fidgety or they don't like something on their shirt, it could be the texture of the tag or the texture of the shirt that they don't like. It could be that, I will fully admit I have done this where I, as a full grown adult, I've accidentally put on my leggings backwards or something weird, right? And I was like, God, it feels weird, but I didn't know why. Turns out my pants were on backwards. That's gonna feel weird. So there are other things that could be going on that we just don't know. So see if you can kind of help to do some investigating as to maybe how come the student is doing some sensory seeking that isn't typical for that person. Okay. How to help with decrease escape or avoidant behaviors. So again, this is making sure that they know how to get out of something. If a student really struggles and they're like, I need to go to the bathroom, gone to the bathroom 5 times in the last 20 minutes, you do not need to go to the bathroom anymore. Or if they consistently have a bellyache during spelling and they have to go to the nurse's office all the time. What is it that they're getting out of, or what is a way that they can still access that? So let's say the student really dislikes spelling. I dislike spelling. If it weren't for the spelling assist, who knows how things would look all the time. But what is a way that they can avoid having to do maybe all of the spelling words, but they're doing it appropriately? Is it okay if you do 10 of these, you don't have to do the last 5? Is it if you give me a break card, then you can get a break and we'll, honor and respect that? Is it a matter of, when you, if you get the first, again, 10 spelling words done, then, you can skip doing the last 5 and you can go and visit the nurse. Like, so making sure that they know what it is that they need to do. And then again, reward those doing hard things, right? If I do something that I didn't think I can do, I'm bragging to everyone. Like, I want people to pat me on the back. That's a normal response. And so making sure that we're rewarding kids and students for doing hard things, like, oh my gosh, look at you. You went up to the board and you did this multiplication problem, even though that multiplication or being in front of people is really hard for you. I'm so proud of you. So making sure that you're really reinforcing and rewarding those hard things. Number 3 is grandma's rule. So it's that first, then. I said, first we do this and then we do this. And that way it's, again, you following through and sticking with it. If you said, first we pick up the classroom floor and then we play Kahoot, you gotta stick to that. If the floor is not cleaned up, we don't do it. And then again, to kind of do some of those, examine and what's going on. Why are they trying to avoid this activity? Is it because they don't have this skill? Are they consistently avoiding spelling because it's very hard for them, and maybe they don't have the skills that they need to do this activity? Maybe they're avoiding writing because writing itself is really difficult for them, or they're avoiding doing group work because they get really anxious having to talk to their classmates. And so thinking of what are those other possible reasons that students could be doing those escape or avoidant behaviors. And these are just some kind of bigger takeaways on the functions of behavior that I hope stick with you. While a specific behavior change strategy should be individualized depending on each student and the behavior you're looking at, most times intervention should include these components. Decreasing the motivation to engage in the behavior in the first place by giving time, space, and opportunities to get it out or to gain access to that function outside of that problem context. So it's, again, looking at how do I give the student access to this without having to have those problem behaviors. If you just ate, you won't be as motivated to work for food. So if a kiddo just got tons of really good attention from you during a fun game or during recess, he's less likely to want that attention when you do the activity right after recess, right? I don't need to be able to give them all of my attention. He's gotten a bunch of it previously. And teaching when and where certain behaviors are appropriate by creating those guidelines and rules, really reinforcing only the context that it's important. Thank you so much for standing in line and for you helped out your classmate by doing this. That was so good. You could have just walked by them. Whatever that is, making sure that you're teaching when you want those expectations, and you've got to reinforce it. You have to make sure we're reinforcing the right activities. And then teaching those replacement skills. We're here to teach students, and they don't always know what they don't know. And so if they are doing X, Y, and Z, what's another way that we want them to do that? So just sitting there refusing to do the activity, how can you help them? Is it a matter of, do you want to do it a different way? Instead of having to go up to the whiteboard and do an activity in front of everyone, can they just do it on the whiteboard, like a small one, and just show you, like, what are the different ways that we can meet the function of them not wanting to do something or wanting to avoid it, and also what matches whatever the academic context is that you're in. So just really being able to teach those new skills and reinforcing, thank you so much for doing this, or look, you did it, great job, whatever that is, reinforcing in a way that's meaningful for that activity. Okay. And then here are my references.